Get him off the driveway. His kind lowers the value of everything they stand next to. Adeline Prescott said that with a deputy's hand already on my father's neck, then kicked his cane skittering across the concrete and kept writing. Elias Ransom, 71, 3 acres. A house that stood there 19 years before her subdivision existed, and a signature on her paperwork he had never once written. I'd been living under a false name for 14 months. I came home behind 6 federal SUVs, still smelling like somebody else's cigarettes. I asked her what authority let her cuff a man on his own land. She told me the FBI has no jurisdiction inside an HOA. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't even nervous. A woman that calm, holding a forged warrant, is never working alone. Stay to the end. The gate behind my convoy had already locked itself. 14 months is a long time to be somebody else. You answer to a name that isn't yours, and sleep in apartments where the carpet smells like other people's bad decisions. I was chasing dirty money laundered through construction contracts, land deals, and it turned out homeowners associations across 3 Tennessee counties. My name is Judah Ransom, Supervisory Special Agent. The only thing that kept me steady was knowing there was a porch light burning at the end of a gravel drive in Bantam County. I missed his 70th birthday. I missed the anniversary of my mother's death. I missed 14 months of Sunday phone calls. So when the operation closed and my partner Regan Holloway insisted on a full escort to move me and 9 crates of seized hard drives back to the field office, I asked for one detour. 20 minutes off the highway, 6 black SUVs, 2 evidence transports, a mobile command truck, and 21 armed agents rolling past a feed store and a shuttered ice cream stand, all so a grown man could hug his daddy in the driveway. I could smell it before I saw it, that Bantam County smell: wet clay and cut hay and diesel off the county road. The tires went from asphalt to gravel with that crunch I'd been hearing in my sleep since I was 9 years old. Here's what you need to understand about that gravel. My grandfather bought those 3 acres in 1974 when the whole hill was pasture and nobody wanted it. He put a house on it in 75, and my father put a new roof on it in 89. Fairmont Ridge Estates didn't exist until 1993 when a developer bought the pasture around us and built a subdivision the way you'd build a fence around a tree you couldn't cut down. We were never in it. Not in 1993, not ever. The subdivision just grew around my family and pretended we'd asked to join. My father worked 31 years for the county utility, most of it as a line foreman. He knows where every water valve, substation, feeder, and fiber vault on that hill actually sits, because he helped put half of them there. He is also a man who does not complain. Which is why I didn't know that Adeline Prescott had spent 11 years turning his retirement into a slow siege. I learned it later sitting at his kitchen table. Compliance letters about aesthetic degradation. Inspectors at 7 in the morning with no appointment. A fence measured twice in 1 week by 2 men who got 2 different numbers. A note taped to his mailbox asking him to consider whether his presentation was consistent with neighborhood standards. He kept the letters in a shoebox under the bed my mother died in. Because that's the part Adeline never understood. My mother, Ruth Ann, spent the last 4 months of her life at that kitchen window, watching the birds on the fence line. There's no number you can write on a check that buys that window. Adeline tried 4 times anyway. That afternoon, the second my badge came out of my jacket, the deputy took the cuffs off my father's wrists so fast he nearly dropped them. Everybody wanted those cuffs to disappear. Everybody wanted this to become a misunderstanding that got cleaned up before supper. I didn't let it. I had Regan photograph the raw red rings on my father's wrists from 4 angles. I had her log the serial numbers stamped on the cuffs themselves and bag them. I asked Deputy Shane Corliss for his body camera footage, and Corliss looked at his boots and said the camera had been off since before he entered the neighborhood. I asked him who told him to turn it off. He looked at the ground, then at Adeline, and didn't say anything at all. And that silence on a hot driveway with my father rubbing his wrists and saying nothing was the moment I stopped being a son who'd come home for dinner. I want to walk you through that warrant because it took me under a minute, and it would have taken you about the same. The case number was formatted wrong. Bantam County runs a year prefix, a division letter, then a 6-digit sequence. This one had 5 digits and no division letter. The court seal wasn't embossed, it was printed and printed badly with that soft gray halo you get when somebody photocopies a copy of a copy. There was no electronic filing verification code anywhere on the page, and every real filing in that state has carried one since 2016. The courthouse address in the header belonged to a building the county sold in 2019, and the signature at the bottom belonged to Judge Randolph Sedge, who retired 3 years ago and now, as far as I know, spends his mornings fishing a pond outside Cookeville. I held the paper up so the sun came through it and asked Adeline Prescott where she got it. She told me her attorney handled all that. Then she told me the old man had lost his house months ago, that I was interfering with a lawful enforcement action, and that if I kept it up, she'd have me removed too. Neighbors were coming out onto their porches by then. Not many, 4 or 5. Enough. And Adeline did something I've seen 100 times in interview rooms, and almost never on a residential street. She raised her voice on purpose. She wanted an audience. She started reading my father's violations out loud, like a rap sheet. $91,400. That was the number she wanted the block to hear. $91,400 in fines and interest owed by a retired lineman on a pension. I asked her to itemize. She was delighted to. Garage door painted a white that wasn't on the approved pallet, $200 plus $50 a day. Fence 6 feet 2 inches where the standard was 6 feet 500 plus $50 a day. Work truck parked overnight in his own driveway, $100 a night for 4 years. Gate maintenance assessments for a gate he'd never used because his driveway comes off the county road on the far side of the property. Refusal to permit interior inspection 2,000, escalating. And my personal favorite, a line item that showed up 11 separate times. Diminishment of community aesthetic character. That's not a violation. That's a feeling with a $sign on it. My father listened to all of it without moving. Then he said the only thing he'd said since I got out of the SUV. I never joined. Adeline smiled like she'd been waiting 11 years for that. She pulled a document out of the back of her folder, laminated, official-looking, held up like a winning hand. A supplemental annexation addendum, dated March of 2014. Voluntarily binding the ransom parcel to the Fairmont Ridge Estates Declaration. And at the bottom in blue ink, my father's name. I've watched men confess to moving $11 million with less emotion than my father showed. He leaned in, looked at it for 3 seconds, and said 4 words. I never signed that. My convoy wasn't just agents and hard drives. Winslow Teague, our financial crimes analyst, had ridden up in the 3rd vehicle, with a field kit he treats better than his own children. Winslow asked permission, put a handheld solvent probe against a clean margin of that blue signature, and watched a little screen for about 90 seconds. Then he said, without looking up, that the ink had been on that page for a matter of months. Not 11 years. Months. You could hear a lawn sprinkler running 2 houses down. That's how quiet the street got. Here's the part I want you to actually keep because it costs you nothing and it protects you. A homeowners association does not get authority over your land because it says so or because your house sits inside a circle somebody drew on a marketing map. It gets authority from a declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC&Rs recorded at the County Register of Deeds against a specific legal description. Your legal description, not your address, not your subdivision's name in a recorded document, with a book and page number you can look up for a few dollars. If your parcel isn't in that recorded declaration, or in a properly recorded and consented annexation, then that association has exactly as much power over you as the man who runs the hardware store. Takeaway. Pull your chain of title and the recorded CC&Rs before you pay $1 to anybody claiming you're a member. Adeline didn't argue the ink or the seal. She took out her phone and she didn't dial 911. She dialed a 10-digit number from memory. And when the man on the other end picked up, she didn't identify herself. She just said, "Odell, I need you out here." Sheriff Odell Brantley showed up in 11 minutes with 8 patrol units. 8. For a driveway dispute already surrounded by 21 federal agents. And he did not come out swinging. That's what I noticed first. He came out of that cruiser with his hat in his hand and a smile like a man greeting his in-laws, calling the whole thing a civil misunderstanding, the kind of thing best handled quietly, away from all these cameras and all this excitement. I asked him why a civil misunderstanding required 8 patrol units and the sheriff himself. He said he was worried a federal convoy might frighten the residents. Regan didn't even look up from her laptop. She just said flatly that we'd used no lights, no sirens, and hadn't blocked a single road, but that the community's front gate had latched itself shut behind our last vehicle, and nobody had touched a control panel to do it. That landed on me harder than the forged warrant did, because it meant somebody had planned for the possibility of witnesses arriving. Somebody had a neighborhood that could close. I told 2 of my agents to walk down and stand at the gate, not to open it, just to stand there where the camera on the post could see them. Brantley's smile got about 10% smaller. Then he did the smart thing, or what he thought was the smart thing. He turned to Corliss and ordered him to release my father and apologize. Big performance, wrong audience. Corliss had already taken the cuffs off 20 minutes earlier, and the cuffs were already in an evidence bag with a serial number logged. That's when Adeline made her first real mistake. She stepped forward and announced loud that this whole thing started because Elias Ransom attacked one of her security officers with a shovel. Assault with a deadly weapon. A phrase that turns an old man in his own driveway into an arrest report anybody can defend. My father didn't react. He didn't even turn his head. He just said, "Camera over the garage. Been up since 2019. Winslow pulled it in about 4 minutes on a tablet, and we watched it standing in a half circle on the concrete, everybody sweating, somebody's wind chimes going in the background, like this was a barbecue. The footage shows 3 men in gray polo shirts cutting the chain on my father's side gate with a cordless saw. It shows the sparks. It shows my father come out of his kitchen door in house slippers, holding a garden spade, the flat-bladed kind you use for edging flower beds, and stand on his own step telling them to get off his land. He never took a step toward them. He never raised it above his waist. 11 seconds later, Adeline walks into frame and points at him, and you can read her mouth without any audio at all. I turned to Brantley and asked him on the record how any sworn officer accepts a garden spade on private property as grounds for an arrest. He said he hadn't seen the footage before that moment. Regan noted the time and kept digging, and what she found in the next hour is the reason this stopped being about my father. One of those men in gray polos worked for a private security company registered to Brantley's brother-in-law. That company held the patrol contract for Fairmont Ridge Estates. And here's the thing about that kind of arrangement. It is not secret. It cannot be secret because it runs through paperwork that belongs to the public. Let me give you the second one to keep. Homeowners associations are corporations. In most states, they file annual reports with the Secretary of State, listing officers and registered agents, and you can read those for free. Sheriff's departments file off-duty employment and private patrol contracts that are public records in the great majority of states. County vendor registries, purchase orders, and 1099 filings show who's being paid and by whom. And an association's own budget ledger and meeting minutes are in most states documents that any member, and often any resident, has a statutory right to inspect. Takeaway if you want to know who an association is really working for: don't argue with the board, file a records request, and follow the money. Winslow filed 3 of them from the hood of an SUV before the sun went down, and he got the first response the next morning. Fairmont Ridge Estates was paying $214,000 a year into a line item called Community Services and Public Safety Liaison. $214,000 from a subdivision of 140 homes. And every dollar of it landed in an account belonging to a limited liability company whose sole member was listed as Odell Brantley's wife. I want to tell you what Adeline Prescott did next, because it tells you everything about what kind of animal she actually was. She didn't lawyer up. She didn't go quiet. She escalated against a 71-year-old man while 21 federal agents were still parked on his road. Tuesday morning, my father's water was off. Not a leak. Not a county outage. Somebody had pulled the meter lid in the easement at the end of his drive and closed the curb stop with a key and left the lid sitting crooked on the grass like a calling card. My father came out at 6 a.m., turned the kitchen tap, got that hollow knocking sound old pipes make when there's nothing behind them, and stood in his own kitchen with an empty coffee pot in his hand. Taped to his front door was a notice on Fairmont Ridge letterhead. Emergency abatement. Suspension of shared utility services pending resolution of delinquent assessments. There is no such thing. You cannot invent a legal instrument by printing a phrase in bold at the top of a page. But it looked official, and it was on his door at dawn, and that is the entire business model. By 9, his truck was gone. Towed off the county road shoulder, where he'd parked it for 30 years, on a complaint called in by the association on a road the association does not own. Which mattered because every Tuesday and Thursday my father drives a woman named Odessa Fain, who is 83 and half-blind, 22 miles to dialysis in Cookville. He didn't call me about the water. He didn't call me about the truck. He called Regan quietly and asked if there was anything wrong with him borrowing a federal vehicle to take a neighbor to a medical appointment. Regan drove Miss Odessa herself. Both trips, in a government SUV. And I want you to know that Adeline Prescott's security cameras caught all of it, because that image ended up mattering a great deal later. Meanwhile, the association's bookkeeper had started thinking. Her name was Corinne Whitlow. 61 years old, 11 years behind that desk, and the kind of woman who alphabetizes her spice rack. That Wednesday, she carried a shredder bag out the back of the management office, and instead of putting it in the association's locked bin, she walked it 200 feet and dropped it in the dumpster behind a laundromat that does not belong to Fairmont Ridge Estates. She did that on purpose. She'd have told you it was a mistake. It wasn't. Thursday afternoon at 4:12, the management office caught fire. I was standing in my father's yard when I heard it. Not an alarm sound, like a dropped door, low and flat. And then the smell. If you've ever smelled an electrical fire mixed with accelerant, you don't forget it. Sharp underneath, greasy on top. Gray smoke came out of the lower windows in a way smoke doesn't come out of an accident. All at once in 3 places. Here's what stayed with me. The whole street turned to look. Adeline Prescott didn't. She stood on the sidewalk with her back to a burning building, looking at her phone, refreshing it. I split the team. Regan held the scene and held Adeline. Winslow held Brantley and his deputies in place. I took 4 agents inside with the fire department 11 minutes out. The sprinkler system had been valved shut at the riser. 3 file boxes in the back room had been soaked in something that went up like a birthday candle, and an HOA employee was going out the rear door with a canvas tote and 2 external hard drives in it right up until he met an agent in the community garden and decided the tomatoes were a good place to lie down. We saved more than she wanted us to. A scorched server. 2 fire safes the heat never got into. A notebook full of account numbers with no names attached. A stack of blank notary seals, blank waiting 30 of them still in the plastic. The fire marshal confirmed by dark that the alarm panel had been powered down manually a full 20 minutes before the first flame. Adeline told the responding captain without being asked that the young man with the hard drives had panicked over an upcoming audit and acted entirely alone. Nobody had accused him yet. She volunteered it. And in the bottom of the second, safe under a folder of deeds, a hand-drawn map of the block. Somebody had drawn it in pen. Careful. To scale. Every lot on the east side of Fairmont Ridge, the creek, the service road, and my family's 3 acres, circled twice in red. Underneath the circle in the same hand, 1 line. Access must close before Friday. I sat down at my father's kitchen table that night with a county plat map, a legal pad, and a glass of sweet tea I never drank, and I asked him to tell me about the land. Not the house, the land. He told me what I should have already known. 3 acres shaped like a wedge sitting at the low corner of the hill. The county water main that feeds the entire east half of Fairmont Ridge ties in at a vault under his fence line. The substation feeder that carries power to 140 homes crosses his back corner on an easement my grandfather granted in 1981. The fiber trunk runs the same corridor, and Hollow Creek cuts across the property at an angle with exactly 1 crossing on it, a timber and culvert bridge my grandfather built with his own hands so he could get a tractor to the back pasture. That bridge is the only way a vehicle gets from Fairmont Ridge Estates into the 90 acres of undeveloped ground behind it. Not the easiest way, the only way. For 30 years, contractors and county trucks and eventually Fairmont Ridge maintenance crews used that crossing on nothing but a handshake between neighbors. My father never charged anybody a dime for it. never put up a gate. He'd wave. Winslow pulled the zoning file the next morning. There it was, approved and stamped Fairmont Crown. 96 luxury villas and a retail pad. Total project value $186 million. And it could not break ground without recorded, permanent legal access across Hollow Creek. The developer had already advanced a $16.5 million deposit. The construction financing had a condition precedent recorded access in hand, and that condition expired Friday. Friday. The same word in red pen, on a map in a fire safe. Then my father told me the part that made my hands go cold. Adeline Prescott had offered to buy the parcel 4 times. $340,000 8 years ago. $700,000 4 years after that. $1.4 million last spring. And then in December, $2.2 million, on the condition he was off the property within 7 days. He turned down all 4. Because of a kitchen window and a woman who used to sit at it. I asked him why he never called me. Not once in 11 years. He looked at his hands for a while. Then he said Adeline had come to his door in the spring and told him she knew what I really did for a living, and knew my real name, and that it would be a shame if the men I was working found out where I came from. She had known who I was for years. She had used my father's fear for me as a leash. And then he got up, went to the bedroom, and came back with my mother's grocery notebook. 11 years of it. Every fine, every letter, every inspector, every plate number in Ruth Ann Ransom's handwriting. First, and then in his. Dated. Timed. Written on a pad with a picture of a rooster on the cover. He said he never meant to sue anybody. He just wanted a record in case somebody ever asked him why he'd gotten so tired. That notebook did more damage in court than anything that survived the fire. First thing I did was take myself out of it. I called the special agent in charge that night and asked to be removed from operational command of anything touching Fairmont Ridge. Reagan Holloway took it. I stayed on the laundering case, fed her what I had, and did not sign another warrant application on that street. People thought that was noble. It wasn't. It was tactical. The one weapon Adeline had left was the story that a federal agent had aimed the bureau at a neighborhood over a family grudge, and I took that weapon off the table before she ever got to pick it up. Takeaway when you're right. The fastest way to lose is to hand the other side a procedural complaint they can hide behind. Then, my father and I did the boring part. The part nobody makes a movie about. We hired a real estate attorney out of Nashville named Priscilla Obedelli, and she filed a quiet title action in Bantam County Chancery Court. Quiet title is exactly what it sounds like. You ask a judge to look at every claim anybody has on your dirt and rule on the record who owns what. And the same afternoon she filed it, she recorded a lis pendens against the parcel at the Register of Deeds. A lis pendens is 4 sheets of paper and about $30, and it is the single loudest thing a homeowner can do quietly. It's a public notice that title to that land is in active litigation. It goes into the index. And from the second it hits that index, no title company in America will insure a transfer, no bank will fund a construction loan against it, and no developer's attorney can certify clean access to a lender. Take away a lis pendens doesn't win your case, but it freezes everybody who was counting on your land while the case gets decided. Second thing, and this one is the piece Adeline never saw coming. 30 years of crews driving across my grandfather's bridge could, in the wrong lawyer's hands, ripen into a prescriptive easement, a legal right to keep crossing earned just by doing it long enough, while the owner said nothing. That's the argument Fairmont Crown's lawyers were quietly building. Except prescriptive rights require use that is hostile, use without permission. And my father had been giving permission for 30 years, waving at trucks, telling the county foreman to go on through. So Priscilla drafted a written revocation of permissive use, recorded it at the courthouse, and had it hand-delivered by process server to the association, to the developer, to the county highway department, and to Thurston Wexler, the HOA's attorney. Certified, signed for, time-stamped. Takeaway if people have been crossing your property with your blessing. Put the revocation in writing and record it. Permission that's never revoked is how you lose land without ever selling it. Third thing, the notary. That annexation addendum was stamped by a notary commissioned in Bantam County. Notary commissions have start dates and expiration dates, and in Tennessee they're public. In most states, the notary also keeps a bound journal. Winslow pulled the record in 20 minutes. The commission on that seal was issued in 2021. The document was dated March of 2014. Takeaway. A forged notarization almost always breaks on the calendar, and the calendar is public. Now for the part my father enjoyed. He called Tully Mabry a retired county surveyor he'd worked beside for 2 decades, and Tully came out with a total station and spent a day and a half setting iron pins on the true boundary, the actual boundary from the actual 1974 deed, which turned out to sit 11 feet farther north than everybody in that subdivision had assumed. Then he called Ozzie Renfro, who runs an excavator, and owed my father a favor from a storm in 2011. And on a Wednesday, in broad daylight, entirely on ransom land, they took out the crossing, pulled the timbers, lifted the 2 rusted culverts out of the creek bed, cut the banks back to the width they'd been before my grandfather ever narrowed them, and regraded the low ground on the east side so runoff pooled where it used to pool, in a soft flat that had been a wetland before anybody put a bridge over it. 40 feet of open water and black mud where a haul road used to be. Then they set 8 steel bollards in concrete along the property line, hung reflective boundary signage every 30 feet, and posted the recorded revocation notice in a weatherproof sleeve on a 4x4 post courthouse stamp facing the road. They finished at 4:40 in the afternoon. It smelled like wet clay and diesel and cut cedar, and my father sat on the tailgate drinking a Coke and looking at that creek like he'd gotten something back. The revocation took legal effect at 12:01 in the morning, the morning of the Fairmont Crown groundbreaking ceremony. Adeline Prescott had about 9 days left, and she spent them the way cornered people always do, loudly. It started in the mailboxes. 140 homes, same envelope, no return address, delivered by hand because bulk mail would have been a federal problem. 6 pages, a photograph of my father's backyard, taken with a long lens and cropped to make a woodpile look like a hoard. A community safety timeline, listing every complaint the association had ever manufactured against him. A paragraph about the individual at the low end of the property that used the words unpredictable and untended, and never once used his name. And on page 5 a line I have read maybe 40 times since. It said the ransom property had never truly been part of the character of this community. That's the whole thing right there. She wasn't fighting about a fence. She never was. 2 days later, a code enforcement lien appeared against the parcel for $11,000 in abatement costs. The water shut off the tow, and I swear this is true, the cost of printing the notices she taped to his door. Priscilla had it stricken in 6 days because you cannot lien a property for enforcing rules you have no authority to enforce. But it sat in the county index for 6 days, and for 6 days my father was a man with a lien on his name. Then it got personal on my side. An anonymous complaint landed with the Bureau's Office of Professional Responsibility, alleging that I had deployed a federal convoy, seized private records, and directed an investigation to settle a family dispute. It named me. It named Regan. It attached photographs of a government SUV parked outside my father's house, and photographs of Regan driving Miss Odessa Fain to her dialysis appointment, presented as proof that federal vehicles were being used for personal errands. An 83-year-old woman on her way to a dialysis chair turned into an exhibit. OPR did their job. They interviewed me for 4 hours, and when they asked when I'd relinquished operational command, I gave them the date, the time, and the name of the SAC who took my request 8 days before the complaint was filed. That's the whole reason I'd stepped back. I just got to watch it pay off. Takeaway document the moment you take yourself out of a fight, because that record is the only thing that survives somebody else's version of events. Then County Commissioner Lyle Danforth called a press conference on the courthouse steps. Danforth is a big man in a good suit, who has been running for governor since roughly the day he was born. He stood in front of 4 cameras and said the federal government was conducting a vendetta in Bantam County. He said an agent had weaponized his badge against a volunteer neighborhood board. He said Adeline Prescott was a grandmother and a civic servant being crushed by Washington. He said this was about local self-governance itself. He never once mentioned a forged warrant. We didn't respond. I wanted to. Regan told me no, and Regan was right. My father responded instead. Deidre Calloway, from the county paper, had been calling the house for a week, and on the Thursday he finally said yes and let her set a phone on his porch rail and record him. He talked for 4 minutes. No lawyer, no notes, wearing the same cap Adeline had knocked off his head. He said he wasn't asking for anything special because his son carried a badge. He said he'd worked 31 years for the county and paid his taxes and buried his wife in this county, and all he wanted was the same thing any man on that street already had the right to, not be handcuffed in his own driveway on a piece of paper somebody printed. Then he said, "I'm not the one who forged anything." That clip went out on a Thursday evening. By Saturday, it had been played in every county in the state. And while all of that was burning up the news, Winslow was 3 floors down in a field office, reading a corporate registry, and he found the thing that ended it. Thurston Wexler, Adeline's HOA attorney, the man who'd handed her a warrant signed by a retired judge, was the registered agent for 4 shell companies. 2 of those companies were already in my case file. They were the same entities that had moved $11 million through construction contracts across 3 counties for 14 months while I lived under a false name chasing them. I hadn't come home and stumbled into my father's fight. I'd been chasing the same people the whole time. I just didn't know they'd gotten to my driveway first. At 3:52 in the morning, 2 days before the ceremony, a truck came down the service road with its headlights off. Not 1 truck, 3. A flatbed carrying 4 steel road plates, a dump truck loaded with crushed limestone, and a pickup with a survey crew in it. They came to the edge of Hollow Creek, looked at 40 feet of open water, where a bridge used to be, and started unloading anyway. The plan was simple and almost smart. Drop the plates, dump enough rock to make a running surface, set 2 survey stakes on the far bank, have a concrete truck pour a temporary construction apron at first light, and by the time the tent went up for the groundbreaking, there would be a crossing sitting there, and possession is a powerful argument in front of a camera. They worked for 2 hours and 14 minutes. They dumped 11 tons of limestone into a creek bed. They set 4 steel plates across a channel that had been widened 2 feet past where they thought it was, watched the first plate slide off the bank and go under, and spent 40 minutes trying to chain it back out with a truck that did not have the weight to do it. And they did every bit of it in front of 6 trail cameras. Because here's what nobody in that subdivision ever bothered to learn about my father. Elias Ransom has been running infrared game cameras on that back corner since 2018. Not for security, for deer. He'd send my mother pictures of an 8-point buck, the way other men send fishing photos. 6 cameras, motion-triggered, time-stamped, infrared. They caught the plates, the rock, the stakes, the license plates on all 3 vehicles, and a foreman on a phone at 5:11 a.m. saying words a good lip reader in Knoxville later put in a sworn declaration. They also caught 11 tons of limestone entering a stream channel in a state that treats that as an unpermitted discharge into waters of the state. My father watched the footage the next morning drinking coffee and said one sentence. They dumped that in the creek. Not they trespassed. Not they broke the law. He'd worked utilities for 3 decades. He knew exactly which agency cared about a creek, and he knew that agency had never once been afraid of a county commissioner. That same afternoon, Corinne Whitlow walked into the federal office in Cookeville with a canvas grocery bag. Inside it was the second ledger. 4 years of it. Not the association's books, the real ones. Names, addresses, dates, dollar amounts, and a column she'd labeled in her own handwriting, Disposition. 13 houses. 13 homes in Fairmont Ridge Estates seized between 2016 and last spring on forged annexation addenda, fabricated fine ledgers, and default judgments obtained against people who never got served. 11 of the 13 homeowners were over 68. 9 of the 13 were black. 2 were in nursing care when the paperwork was filed. 1 had been on a 4-month deployment. Every one of those houses went to a shell company at somewhere between 11 and 19 cents on the dollar. And every one of them resold inside 90 days at market. Total illegal gain once the analysts finished $27 million. Corinne sat in that room and told Reagan she'd known for 4 years. She said she kept telling herself it was procedure, that the lawyers had signed off, that it wasn't her name on anything. And then she watched a deputy put handcuffs on a man in his own driveway over a fence in front of his son. And she went home and couldn't eat. She said the copies had been in her attic since 2022. She'd been waiting to find out if anybody would ever be strong enough to use them. Meanwhile, Sheriff Brantley made his last mistake. He pulled Deputy Shane Corliss off patrol and reassigned him to a night post on a county line road 40 minutes out, the kind of assignment that says nothing out loud and everything in private. Regan had a federal subpoena in Corliss's hand by 4 o'clock that same afternoon. Thursday night, Adeline came down the county road herself and stood at the end of my father's drive. She didn't get out of the car. She told him through the window that he had until morning to sign an access agreement, and that after morning, there wouldn't be an offer at all. My father said, "Camera on the mailbox, too." She backed out fast enough to throw gravel. And then we did nothing. No raid, no press, no statement. For 36 hours, the loudest thing the federal government did in Bantam County was park, because everything we needed was already recorded, filed, indexed, and time-stamped. And Friday was coming whether Adeline Prescott liked it or not. Friday came up hot and clear, the kind of Tennessee morning where the air is already thick at 8 a.m. They'd set the tent on the flat above the creek. White canopy folding chairs, a table of pastries going soft in the heat, and 6 ceremonial shovels with the blades spray-painted gold, stuck in a mound of dirt somebody had trucked in for the photograph. There was a podium with the Fairmont Crown logo on it. There was a press bus, 4 television stations, the county paper, 2 trade publications, and Deidre Calloway with a phone on a tripod. Commissioner Lyle Danforth was there in a blue suit. Thurston Wexler was there with a briefcase, and Adeline Prescott was there in a cream blazer greeting people like a bride's mother. And a quarter-mile back on the service road sat the reason all of them were about to have a very bad morning. 14 pieces of equipment on lowboy trailers, 2 excavators, a dozer, a compactor, pipe, and a fuel truck. All of it staged to roll across Hollow Creek at 9:15, on camera, into the 90 acres behind my father's property. Because a groundbreaking is a photograph, and the photograph requires machines moving dirt. Nobody had driven the route. At 9:11, the lead lowboy came around the bend and stopped. Where the crossing used to be, there was 40 feet of open creek. Blackwater cut banks, and a soft flat on the east side that had already turned back into wetland, cattails coming up a heron standing in it like it had lived there its whole life. 8 steel bollards and fresh concrete across the property line. Iron survey pins with orange flagging. Boundary signs every 30 feet. And a 4x4 post with a weatherproof sleeve on it, holding a recorded notice of revocation of permissive use, register of deeds, stamp facing the road book, and page number big enough to read from a truck cab. The driver got out, walked to the edge, walked back, got on the radio. And somebody at the tent, I have always believed it was Danforth, though he denies it, told him to find a way across. He tried the limestone. He put 90,000 pounds of trailer onto 11 tons of rock that had been dumped into a live creek bed 36 hours earlier, and the whole thing went down like a foot into cake. Both trailer axles buried past the hubs. The tractor's rear duals sank to the frame, hydraulic fluid on the water, diesel smoke standing straight up in the still air. 9 cameras. The heron didn't even move. Adeline came down that service road at a dead walk in dress shoes and started shouting at deputies to get the barriers off the property line and get that truck across. Regan Holloway was standing 11 feet away. She said pleasantly, "Ma'am, those bollards are on private land, and you just ordered 4 sworn officers to destroy them on a live feed." Then she did the rest of it out loud, because the cameras were already running, and my father was standing right there in a clean shirt. She read the list pendants recorded 8 days earlier, index number and all. She read the ink analysis, dating a 2014 signature to the previous spring. She named Judge Randolph Sedge, retired 3 years, whose name was on a warrant used to handcuff a 71-year-old man. She read the notary commission number and the year it was issued, 2021, against a document dated March 2014. She read $214,000 a year flowing from a homeowners association into an LLC belonging to the sheriff's wife. And then she read 13 addresses, 13 houses, the names of the people who had lived in them, 11 of them over 68, 9 of them black. $27 million. Danforth started toward his car and found an agent standing next to it. They arrested Adeline Prescott at the tent line in front of the pastries with the gold shovels still stuck in a pile of imported dirt. Thurston Wexler, Sheriff Odell Brantley, Commissioner Lyle Danforth, 6 board members, 2 clerks from the county land office. Corliss walked over on his own and put his hands out before anybody asked him to. Adeline looked at me the whole time. She wanted it to be me. I didn't touch her. I walked to the evidence van, signed out the bag with the cuffs that had been on my father's wrists 11 days earlier, checked the serial number against the log, and handed them to Regan. Then I said the only thing I said all morning. Same pair. My father's wrists are in the paperwork. Yours are just the next line. Fairmont Crown died that afternoon. Not in court at a bank. The lender pulled the construction financing because a title company would not insure access across a parcel under a recorded lis pendens, and no amount of shouting from a county commissioner has ever moved a title underwriter 1 inch. The $16.5 million deposit went into receivership, and a federal judge redirected it into a victim compensation fund. The charges ran long. Forgery of court records. Use of a fabricated judicial instrument. Wire fraud, mail fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy against rights that one's a civil rights count, and it exists precisely because of ledgers like Corinne Whitlow's. Bribery of a public official, obstruction, destruction of evidence, unlawful discharge into waters of the state, which delighted my father more than any of the rest of it. Adeline Prescott told the jury she had only ever been protecting property values. Then they played the driveway footage and the ink report, and the recording of her own voice through a car window telling a 71-year-old man he had until morning. The jury needed a little under 4 hours. Brantley lost his badge, his pension, and his freedom. Wexler was disbarred and took a plea. Danforth's gubernatorial campaign ended in a courthouse hallway on a Tuesday. Corinne Whitlow testified for 2 full days, line by line through 4 years of ledgers. Corliss testified too, about the morning a voice on the phone told him to switch off his camera before he entered a neighborhood. 13 homes went back to the owners, where they were still living, to the heirs, where they weren't. One of those families had moved to Ohio in 2018, convinced they'd simply lost a legal fight they never understood. Every fine against my father, all $91,400 of it, was voided, and the county recorded a formal declaration confirming what had been true since 1974. The ransom parcel had never been inside anyone's jurisdiction but its own. Fairmont Ridge Estates was dissolved by court order and replaced with an elected oversight board with sharply limited authority, where every assessment now requires an open recorded vote of the residents themselves. And then my father did the thing I did not expect. He kept the creek open, not to trucks, to people. He granted the county a permanent public easement along the north bank of Hollow Creek for a walking trail, and he put a conservation covenant on the wetland, the one that came back on its own the week Ozzie Renfro pulled 2 culverts out of a creek bed. 90 acres of villas didn't get built. A heron rookery moved in instead. The trail opened in April. There's a bench at the low end with a small brass plate on it that says Ruth Ann's Window. He also used part of the compensation award to start something small. The Ruth Ann Ransom Fund pays filing fees, deed research, and title searches for homeowners in 4 counties who are fighting an association alone and can't afford the $300 it costs to prove their right. $300. That's the entire gap most people lose in. I went back out there in October. No convoy. No escort. Just me alone with a post hole digger and a bag of concrete in the back seat to hang the side gate those men had cut open with a saw. My father supervised, which is a word that means he drank coffee and told me the post wasn't plumb. When we finished, he stood there looking down the hill at that creek for a long time, and he said, "Your mother would have liked the trail." That's the whole story. That's what $186 million lost to a retired lineman, a Rooster notebook, and $30 worth of paper filed at a courthouse. If you've got an association in your life that's decided you're the problem, I want to hear about it. In the comments, the letter, the fine, the inspection, whatever they pulled. Somebody reading is going through the same thing right now and doesn't know what to file. And if these stories are worth your time, subscribe, because the next one involves a board that fined a widow for the color of her mailbox and then found out who her late husband used to work for. 6 feet 2 inches. That's what started it. A fence 2 inches taller than a rule Elias Ransom never agreed to, on land that had been his family's 19 years before that subdivision had a name. I keep coming back to that. Not the 27 million. Not the handcuffs. 2 inches. Because that's how it always starts. Nobody knocks on your door and tells you they intend to take your house. They send a letter about paint, then a note about a mailbox, then a fine and another fine, and one day you're a man on a pension staring at $91,400, wondering how in the world you got there. Elias didn't beat them by getting angry. 11 years and he never once got loud. He wrote things down in a notebook with a rooster on the cover. He kept his letters in a shoebox. And when it finally mattered, about $30 worth of paper filed at a courthouse did more damage than any shouting match ever could have. That's the part that ought to sit with you a minute. Because most men watching this have a board like that somewhere in their life. Maybe it's already started. A letter about your truck, a note about your grass, something small enough that you told yourself it wasn't worth the fight. I'd like to know what yours was. What did the first letter say? Put it in the comments. I read them. And if this one was worth your time, hit like and send it to somebody who's currently going back and forth with a board over 2 inches of anything. That does more good than you'd guess. One last thing. 13 families in that neighborhood lost their homes before anybody looked at the paperwork. 13. Not because the paperwork was strong, because nobody ever asked to see it. Small power only stays powerful as long as nobody opens the file.